Let me tell you the story about one of these rigs that we were on in Louisiana. One of my drivers was, I'm just making this name up, Dennis Smith, for personal reasons. Dennis Smith was an ex-paratrooper. This is in the early 1960s. He had been in the paratroop corps. He'd been in battle someplace. He was a real man sort of man. God endowed him with an unbelievable, powerful body. He didn't have any body fat. He's one of these guys that had no body fat. And he enjoyed showing his muscles. He was a young guy, real young, in his early 20s. But every time we went to a drilling site, he would go up on the rig floor before we could rig up. And the thing that he would do is confront all the rig hands and say that he would bet them that he could do more push-ups than any of them. And then he'd put some money on the bet. Nobody ever beat him. He would have guys say that they could do 100. And Dennis would say, whatever you do, I'll do one more. But he was so in good shape athletically, and he was just a master of push-ups, that he would also challenge some of the more bold rig hands, and most of these guys are young, to one-arm push-ups. And it was the same bet. Whatever you do, I'll do one more. And most of those guys, you know, if they felt capable of doing those push-ups, they'd take him on. Well, Dennis never lost. He never lost. He had guys who said, I can do 100 one-arm push-ups, and some of those guys got close to it. Dennis could always do one more. But that's not the story of Dennis. The story of Dennis is every time we went on a job, I didn't know him very well. He wasn't a warm, fuzzy sort of guy, but he was always talking about how he hated his father. Hated his father. He said, you know, my old man works in an oil field somewhere. Someday I'm going to run across him. I'll kill that when I see him. I hate him. And after you hear a guy say that a lot, you just kind of dismiss it as cheap talk. But he did explain why he had these hard feelings. It turns out when Dennis was 2-year-old, he was a 2-year-old and he had a 1-year-old brother, that the father had abandoned the mother and the 2 boys. And it was a pretty nasty marriage situation. He didn't go into a lot of details. But there was the mother hated the man. He had mistreated her terribly. But she had talked to her sons all the way through what a terrible man the father was. And she painted a picture that just made him almost demon-like. And so Dennis grew up with this picture in his mind and how terrible this man was to have hurt the mother and Dennis and his brother by abandoning them. And there were real issues of poverty and abuse that were involved in this. So anyway, Dennis constantly talked about it. Well, he talked about it so much that after a while you don't even listen. And I think I just kind of dismissed the whole thing out of hand. You know, he's never going to see his dad. His dad probably dead or something. So we're on this job in Louisiana, and it happened to be cold, and it was a rainy night. Now, they got a lot of lights on these rigs. The lights shine down, they shine out on the boardwalk, and they shine toward our truck where we set up. And our truck had a big winch on it. It had 25,000 feet of cable we used to lower our tools down in the well. And Dennis happened to be sitting at that winch. And it was customary when we started to set up and get our equipment rigged up in the rig itself, for the rig hands to come down to our truck. It was just tradition. We always had a big urn of coffee. So they'd come down and say, hey, Schlumberger, you got any coffee? And we always did, and they enjoyed it. It was fun talking to them. So on this one night, it's a blustery night, and it was cold and raining, and Dennis was sitting at the spooling device for this winch. He could look out the window, the back of the truck, up at the drilling rig and watch the tools going down in the hole. It had a steering wheel which helped to spool the cable back and forth on that drum. And he's sitting there in the chair, he's got his hands on that wheel. And I'm sitting at my instrument that I had to watch that was recording things. And I just looked up, and I noticed that Dennis's, the hair on the back of his neck was kind of bristling, and he was acting kind of odd. And I could see his muscles tense. You could see all kinds of musculature in his neck and his shoulders and his hands. He was just an amazingly built guy. But something was happening, and I noticed that the knuckles on his hands had gone white at one point. And then I looked, and I could see a guy walking from the drilling rig toward our truck. He had a slicker suit on, and he's got a slicker hat, and it's raining. And he's moving toward our truck, and of course he's coming to get his coffee, right? So he opens a door, and he steps up inside the cab. Now you could stand up inside that cab where we had all of our instruments and where Dennis was seated at that spooling device on that winch. And the guy comes in, he takes off his hat, shakes it off, closes the door. He says, "Hey, you guys got any coffee in here?" And there was another guy, another assistant there, who served him a cup of coffee. I could see Dennis's knuckles; they were white, and I could just see it. He was in agony, and I wondered what was going on. And then I thought, I wonder if this is his dad. He knew what his dad looked like. His mom had pictures of him. At any rate, he swiveled in his seat to face this man. And there was just anger and bitterness and kind of a horrible, mean look on his face. And he stood up out of his chair. And the guy standing there with a cup of coffee, and he looked that guy right in the face. And I thought, that must be his dad. Man, did he look mean. Dennis. Anyway, Dennis took one step toward him, which caused the distance between their noses to go from about 3 feet to about 1.5 feet. And I know it was only a matter of a second that transpired. Dennis leaned in and started to say something. All this happened in a split second. He started to say something, and I thought it was going to be, "I'm going to kill you." But what he said was, "Dad," and he threw his arms around this guy, the rig hand, the guy with the coffee. The guy with the coffee dropped his cup, and he looked at Dennis and he said, "Dennis?" And seconds passed. Wasn't much time. Dennis said, "I love you, Dad." And the father said, "I love you, Dennis." And they talked for a long time. I don't know how that happened, but it was a beautiful scene to observe. Another interesting life lesson for me to be exposed to. A real moving experience with two guys that were tough, two guys that had strong, independent spirits. But both of their attitudes were broken at that point, and they embraced each other. Now, I don't know what the end of the story was, whether they, got together again or not. But it was quite an experience to observe it. Thank you.